We've brought forward and released KS030887K6 as KanMark. This is a line that we think is best adapted to western Kansas. It's got very good drought tolerance, probably very similar to TAM 111 in that it's tolerant to moderate drought, more so than maybe a severe drought. It is a shorter statured wheat. I was concerned about that coming into this year, but it maintained its height very well under the very dry conditions. It has very good quality, and it has very good leaf and stripe rust resistance at this point. It does have a Simmet spring wheat in it with what we know to have race non-specific resistance. We're not sure we've transferred that, but we may have some of the more durable resistance in KanMark. At the very least, it's resistant to the current races of leaf and stripe rust, giving producers some options there. And again, we think it's probably best adapted to the western part of the state. We're kind of drawing a line from Mankato to Ellsworth to Pratt to Kiowa, and there and west is probably its best area of adaptation. I think it will be fine in the central part of the state. It is susceptible or moderately susceptible to acid soils and very susceptible to scab. So as we start to move into the more central parts of the state, we have that concern. But its yield potential has been very good. I would liken it more to a workhorse than a racehorse. It tends to be toward the top of the test almost all the time, but it's not necessarily the very top of the test. So it's not necessarily the one that runs way out in front, but it's very consistent, which I think has a lot of value. And so we think it's going to be a good fit there. It also has done really, really well under irrigated conditions. And so we think in western Kansas, irrigated, it could do extremely well. Kind of the caveat there is the scab. So if you're following corn, there needs to be some care in terms of management on irrigated conditions. KanMark is the product of a three-way cross. So it originated with some of our effort to bring in those race non-specific resistances to leaf and stripe rust. So there's a line from Simmet that has the pedigree with Perula and Pastor, which are two pretty well-known spring wheats out of the Simmet breeding program. And that's 25% of the pedigree. Another 25% is a line that comes from Gertsen Seed Research and the West Bred program. It's a hard white wheat with about 50% Carl 92 in the pedigree. And then the last half of the pedigree is a breeding line out of the K-State program that has 2145, Carl 92, and a number of other lines in the background. So we made this cross back in 2003. It's taken us 11 years to go from cross to release, as is fairly typical in winter wheat, but it's done very well throughout the course of the breeding program, and had good quality, and so it's been tested at a number of locations. I don't have the exact number, but we've been probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 location years of yield data that supports the release of KanMark. I think probably the most desirable trait is just consistency under moderate drought. So it just seems to be a very consistent variety, continues to yield well. Again, it isn't necessarily at the very top of the yield trials, but under that moderate drought, in those dry land conditions in western Kansas, it's been remarkably consistent. So I think that consistency is what I would consider to be probably its most valuable characteristic. So KanMark is a name that we chose to recognize the contributions of Mark Carleton. Mark Carleton was a pretty well-known plant explorer in the early 1900s at K-State. He actually made some very significant contributions to the wheat industry in the United States overall, and Kansas in particular. He went to Russia and he collected a bunch of land races in Russia. Those included things like Kharkov and Crimean that were used that had improved winter hardiness over the Turkey Red. And so those were very important in the establishment of winter wheat in Kansas. He also brought in durum wheats that are the foundation for the durum industry in the north central U.S. And he selected the first released variety that K-State ever had, first improved variety, which was Can Red, and it was a selection from the Russian landrace Crimean. So he brought all that in. He was the first president of the American Society of Agronomy. We felt like the contributions that he made to the wheat industry in Kansas and the U.S. were very significant and that they really deserved to be recognized. And so, like I said, he released Can Red as a selection from Crimean, so KanMark takes the can part from Can Red, kind of a recognition of of nearly a century of improved wheat varieties from K-State, and then Mark from Mark Carlton. Carlton was already taken as a name, so this is what we came up with. It's actually an interesting variety because in the course of looking at things, you start with a visual selection, and then you take something that you like based on maturity, plant type, all those things, and then you start to test it in yield trials. And I would say I've always looked at this variety and thought, honestly, it's kind of ugly. It's kind of been the ugly duckling, and it's a very upright plant type. And then, so it doesn't necessarily canopy very well, and so it looks pretty open. It looks like there's not enough tillers, and I would keep looking at it thinking, I just don't know. But every year the yield would be quite good. So I guess the one thing I would tell producers is don't judge it until you bring it across the scale. Don't judge it just on what it looks like, because it isn't necessarily the most attractive variety that we've ever released, but we're not here to release bouquet wheats. We're here to release varieties that will make money for producers. And so I think it will do that.